Welcome to the Communication Queens podcast for the visionary leaders, speakers, service providers, and podcasters who are looking to stand out sharing their story. I'm your host, Kimberly Spencer, former screenwriter turned master communications coach. On this podcast, I'll be coaching you on how to share your own transformation story so that you increase your visibility, influence, and income on podcast interviews. Let's get your voice heard.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited to share with you the fact that my book, Make Every Podcast Want You, How to Become So Radically Interesting You'll Barely Keep from Interviewing Yourself, is now available on Amazon. So this episode is sponsored by my book. I am so excited to have birthed this book baby into the world. So click the link below and you will get your copy. I am so honored and excited to have been on this journey with you. This is the book that combines all the NLP communication strategies that we talk about on this podcast, along with podcast guesting strategies, tips, tricks, and how you share your story so that you serve, connect, and sell with your message. This book combines all of that to make you a radically interesting and masterful podcast guest that every podcast will want to have, including the top 1%. So let's get you booked on those top 1% of podcasts when you get your copy of Make Every Podcast Want You, How to Become So Radically Interesting You Will Barely Keep from Interviewing Yourself. Click the link below to buy it now. Welcome back to another episode of the Communication Queens podcast. I am Kimberly Spencer. I am so honored to be here with you today. I was having a conversation with a client of mine, and she was sharing with me about her story and just having some doubts about her career and like putting herself out there and getting visible and thinking that she didn't have enough trauma, enough challenge to actually be of service. And she literally said, well, Kim, you've experienced, childhood sexual abuse. You experienced sexual assault. You experienced, divorce. You experienced all, being bought out of a business and having multiple businesses and being an entrepreneur since you were 19 and all of these things. And like, my life isn't that interesting. I was a mom and I had a job. Then my kids grew up. Then I was divorced. And now here I am starting a new career in my mid-50s. And I was like, Queen, first and foremost, you do not have to have heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps of trauma to go on podcasts, to share your story, to be of service. In fact, I'm so glad that you don't, first and foremost. First and foremost, let's just lay it out there. So glad that you don't. So glad that you didn't have to overcome all that shit. It's just, let's have a hot moment of gratitude for the things that you didn't have to face. And our egos get so sensitive about comparison. And so if you've ever thought, because I know we've had some extraordinary stories on this podcast of just resilience and healing and growth and expansion and, the dark nights of the soul and the great leaps into the atmosphere and the stratosphere of success. And you don't have to have that to be successful on podcast interviews. Now, yes, having a story is valuable, but everyone has a story. And yes, I have said, and probably will say, is that to get on the top 1% of podcasts, you do need to do cool shit with your life, like master something. Especially if you want to get on a global top 100 podcast, mastery is essential. Master the art of whatever it is that you're interested in. Be a masterful coach. Be a masterful mom. Be a masterful wife. Be a masterful sex therapist. Whatever it is that you're doing, be a masterful business owner. Be masterful at supporting your team. There has to be a level of mastery to get on those top level. And yes, story is important. But you don't have to have the trauma of the trauma stories to successfully serve other people. In fact, I'm so glad that you don't, because there will be people, and this is exactly what I said to my client. I told her, there will be people who may hear my message and they will be a little uncomfortable with what I share because it's not pretty. It's not all glossed over. There's not I mean, I'm a very optimistic person. I will always find a silver lining in every challenge. And I also share, certain things really matter-of-factly as to how they happened and what happened and what I took them to mean initially and what I now make the meaning of them now. And it's very different. But not everybody will resonate with that because especially certain people who may not have had to forgive somebody, or maybe they struggle with forgiveness and they don't see how I could forgive somebody like my father. And I do. And I hope that others would as well, but some people may not, because perception is projection, right? So I told her, I said, there will be people who will not resonate with my message. There will be people who see me, they see the success that I've had, and I don't have a college degree. And because I don't have a college degree, they will immediately, ignore me. And that's okay. That's 100% okay, because that's why you're here. They may not have faced trauma. They may not have had heaps of childhood adversity. They may have gone to college and they may have followed the traditional path. And that's not me. And so I won't resonate necessarily as much with them as you might. And I told her, I said, you followed the traditional path. You did the college, you got the job, you then were a mom and then just were stay-at-home mom for a while. Like, you rocked out that role, and then your marriage fell apart. And you feel like you did everything right. And still there was a giant explosion in your family, in the marriage of your family. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's right. And I said, yeah, I haven't had those struggles, thank God. So each struggle is to their own. And whenever I see anyone comparing trauma or comparing stories, and maybe you've done this when you're listening to a podcast, you're like, oh my God, they've endured so much. Like, oh my God, how did they even get through it? Especially if you listen to somebody like Blythe Cox's interview on the Crown Yourself podcast. Whew, oh my God. Oh my God. Like, and I've heard a lot of stories, but damn. So it's very easy for our egos to compare trauma, to say, oh, I haven't suffered enough. And so my story is therefore irrelevant or not as impactful. Non-fucking sense. Excuse my French. Nonsense. Because you are thinking that, there are other people out there who are dismissing the validity of their own story because they don't feel in their egoic sense that they have suffered enough, that they have struggled enough. Yet every day is a struggle for them. They struggle with maybe boredom. They struggle with apathy. They struggle with malaise. So for those people, you can be the voice. You can be the voice who's like, I never felt like my suffering was as valid. That's the thing with our egos. Our egos love to have validity or invalidity. It swings the pendulum either to like, we're completely valid in all our suffering and in all our stories, or we are completely invalid and cannot share our stories because they have not suffered enough. And it's bullshit. Just laying it out there. Because your story, in exactly how your story is, will serve and impact exactly who it's supposed to meet. I used to have this with sexual trauma. And yeah, we're going to go there in this podcast. So heads up, brace yourself. I used to think that because I was only molested once in the whole time, that it was a big mistake. Yes, it was horrible. Yes, it was a giant mistake. Yes, it traumatized me. Yes, I had issues definitely coming from it for years. And I invalidated my experience because I said, oh, it wasn't consistently. Oh, it wasn't, years of abuse. No, it happened once. But imagine all the other children out there who are invalidating the one time that it happened, which is basically, by the way, making an excuse for the one time that it happened, which is inexcusable. Once is enough. So I would dim that down. Same with the story of sexual assault when I was 24. I struggled with PTSD from that because it wasn't as bad as I thought sexual assault had to be. I thought it had to be this whole movie, like, back alley corner thrown into a wall, all the drama that you see in the movie. No, it was quite the opposite. It was a simple no, and my no was not honored. And then it was a simple, like, no, get off of me, and my no was not honored. And it was a simple no, and I crumpled in shame. It was not this gigantic fight. It was not this dramatic Hollywood brutal scene. It was a couple no's, but my no's were not honored until I elbowed the guy, and then it was. But then I struggled with, was I just sexually assaulted? Is that considered rape? Just what he just did to me? Like, yes, it is. Rape is sexual penetration without permission, period. And because of the experience, I struggled to go to the gym. I knew he worked there. I felt embarrassed. I was terrified of seeing him again, of bumping into him. And I didn't know why. Because it wasn't bad enough for me. It wasn't brutal enough for me. And I invalidated my own experience until I didn't. Until 2018, when I was like, holy shit, that is what happened. That is what happened. I am owning my experience. My no was not honored. My no was dismissed. There was penetration without permission, very clearly without it. There was that experience again without it. It was not listening. So yes, but in you sharing your story in exactly the way that it happened for you, it allows you to put aside the egoic assumptions that it wasn't bad enough. And damn, that is a belief. That is a belief. It's a belief that can only be dismantled by the sharing of your story. Because there are other women out there who it wasn't bad enough, who it was only one time. And we make excuses for that in society, to be quite very transparent. Oh, it was just once. Oh, he only hit me once. No, that's absolutely unacceptable. So understanding and honoring your story in exactly the way that it is and accepting it as, I'm going to say this and I'm warning you, it may be triggering, but your story as is perfect for those who need to hear it. Because maybe you're out there today and maybe something has happened to you and it was only just one time. It was only once, but it's haunted you. And by me being able to share my story of it was only one time and it haunted me too, there's now empathy. There's now compassion. There's now permission that it is what it was, and you can feel bad about it however it happened to you or for you. So it's in this moment that I'm reminded of the show Modern Family. And if you've ever watched the show, great show, there was an episode where the two gay dads were trying to get their adopted Vietnamese daughter into this hoity-toity preschool. And they were like, oh, yes, two gay dads with an adopted Vietnamese daughter, like, we are a shoo-in for this, as if we're, throwing down the diversity card for sure. And as they're there in the interview, they see a lesbian couple with an adopted, I'm not sure, I forget whether it's a son or a daughter, but an adopted child, who I believe was Black. But I do remember that one of the lesbian women was in a wheelchair, and they look at each other like, crap. So they because there is always going to be someone who has experienced more. Like, someone could hear my story of it's only one time, it only happened once, and they were, they did have the back alley experience. They did have multiple occasions. They did have multiple experiences of different forms of abuse. Maybe they came from a war-torn country. Like, maybe they came from a space where they had bombs going off every day. I didn't live with that. I grew up in Burbank. Like, my trauma does not resonate with that, but it doesn't invalidate it. And This is where being able to have the courage to share your story as is so essential, because your story is going to give those people permission who are just like you. And there are many people out there who are just like you. There are many people out there who have suffered, who have experienced a challenge, and then who have invalidated it, especially women. My God, as women, we're so good at doing that to ourselves and invalidating our experiences. Please, let's just collectively stop and own what happened, what was wrong, bad, fucked up about what happened, and then giving ourselves the permission to accept it as part of our past, that it wasn't any worse or any better, but it was what it was. It is what it is. My favorite saying of these past few years, it is what it is. And in that acceptance, we have the truth, where it's not our egos trying to downplay an experience that happened to us because we didn't think it was bad enough, where we are accepting ourselves. And acceptance is an emotional vibration. Acceptance is on the pathway to courage. And by having the courage to share your story, accepting it as it was and letting it be what it was, that in and of itself is so powerful for all of those who are still struggling in shame and guilt and in all of those lower vibratory emotions around those pieces of their story that they have not yet accepted because of the belief that it was not bad enough. This is why when you do a TED Talk, it's not about share your trauma, because there will always be someone's trauma that trumps yours. There will always be someone who had it worse. It doesn't make what you had right or wrong, good or bad, any better. It just is what it is. And if we can accept the cards that we were dealt, accept the past and that it happened, and then share our stories and the past and how it happened and what we learned and how we grew and how we evolved and how we transformed and how we had compassion and how we forgave. I know I'm at that space. I don't know, not everybody else is, but when you get to that space, oh, it's glorious. It really is. But it has to be rooted in the acceptance of it was what it was, and the defiance of the belief system that it wasn't bad enough, so I probably shouldn't share that. It wasn't horrible. I mean, it was horrible, but it wasn't, the movie scene that we expect. So when I told my client this, she was so grateful. And she saw her story in a whole new light, accepting the divorce for being what it was. For it tore her family apart. It estranged her child from her. And eventually, she got back and reconnected with her estranged daughter after a good year of healing. And that's her story that she gets to share. It's not my story. My story is different. But for those family members, for those people who went through their life thinking that they did all the right things, marrying the right person, doing the college, getting the job, becoming a mom, doing all the right things, and then suddenly their life turns upside down. Her story is going to resonate with them. My story is different. And that's okay. It's important that we yes and both. Both are valid. Both are essential, because people out there are struggling and they're suffering and they're facing challenges. And seeing you a few steps ahead of where they are, that's how you get to really let your light out and light the way for people who are in that same space, who are in a similar arena of life. Maybe not exactly the same circumstances, but a similar arena. And you're choosing to get in it and share your story and let the critics fall where they may, because they're just up in the stands. And you're choosing to lead the way. You're choosing to be that guiding light through their darkness. Every story is going to resonate with a certain person. Every story is not going to resonate with everyone, but we all resonate with what we resonate with. So I encourage you to take from this episode to trust yourself, to trust your story, to trust what you're learning and what you learn from it, and to trust that what you experienced was enough to be able to share it. And beyond that, go also live an epic future. Go live an epic life. Go create something amazing and start down that path of mastery. As always, my fellow sovereigns, I hope this episode resonated with you. If it did, please take a screenshot of it and share your breakthrough, your aha, your takeaway. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. As always, your story has the power to save at least one life. So get out there, stand out, and be heard.
Thank you so much for listening. If you love this episode, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. For more tips on guest podcasting, storytelling, and communication strategies, follow us on social media at Communication Queens Agency and visit us at communicationqueens.com. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And in the meantime, remember, your story has the power to save one life. Let your story and your voice be heard.